I want you to understand that getting healthy and losing weight has very little, if anything, to do with exercise. If you are not already exercising and you already have an exercise routine, when you are obese and you're trying to lose weight, starting to exercise is the very last thing you want to do, because losing fat and getting healthy is all about the food you eat. No matter how hard you work out, you will never start burning the fat out of your fat cells. You have to change the food you eat. So that's what I'm going to be explaining to this. So I don't want you guys going into a weight loss program thinking that you have to exercise. Don't waste money on gym memberships. Don't go buy a bunch of new clothes. Don't buy fitness equipment if you are not used to out already. There will be a time, and you'll know when that time is, because when you start eating healthy and you start using your fat for your energy stores, like God made us to do, instead of using glucose for energy source, like the food companies and drug companies are telling you to do, when you start eating healthy, you will lose fat and you will gain energy. And then you'll want to exercise because you have all this extra energy. Trust me, I know it happened to me. It happened to my wife. It's happened to many of our friends and people we don't even know that have started listening to what we had to say. And that's the first things they say when they start losing all their weight is it was so easy to do. They had no idea. They think a lot more clear and they have so much more energy than they ever did. That's what you want to feel when you have that, and then start exercising. So again, don't waste money on gym memberships if you're not used to already exercising. And I love exercising. Exercising is extremely important. It's very good for your body, but there's only limitations to what it can do as far as you losing your fat. And this becomes horrible because the worst advice that anyone has ever given is eat less calories and exercise more. It doesn't work that way, because it is not about calories. It is about the source of those calories. Because some calories you eat and it helps energize your body and fuel your body. And some calories that you eat actually cause you to store all the calories you're eating as fat. And that's what I want to talk about. So it's not about calories, it's about the calorie source. If you want to do something physically, which everyone should, the minimum amount that you should do is walk every single day. Everybody needs to walk. If you're 520 pounds or if you're 110 pounds, it doesn't matter. Everybody needs to walk every single day. This isn't about burning calories. This isn't about burning fat out of your fat cells. It's about moving your body, because there's so many things that are important just with moving your body. If you're trying to lose weight, reverse your type 2 diabetes, anything you're trying to do, you have to change what you eat and you have to walk every single day. Those are the two things you need to do. So, the reason why that is because our body, we have different things that we use for energy. We can use glucose or we can use fat. And our body is very efficient. So it's going to use the energy that's already in our blood first, and then it's going to go to our stored energy. So the first thing it's going to do is going to use glucose in your blood for its initial energy source, because your body does not want a high blood glucose. So anytime you put glucose in your blood, your body is going to release insulin to try to get that glucose down. So it's going to use the glucose out of your blood first. Then it's going to use whatever fat you have in your blood. Then it's going to go to your glucose stores if you keep on doing it, and you're going to use up your glucose stores. And then you're going to get into your fat stores. If you just look at the glucose stores by themselves, you have about 2,400 calories of stored glucose in your body. Okay, you have 2,400 calories. If you work out very hard, a resistance, lifting heavy weights for an hour, you may burn off 400 to 800 calories. Okay, you're not going to get anywhere near that 2,400. So you're never going to get to the fat in your fat cells. Okay, there's only one way to do that, because there's one thing that makes your fat go into your fat cells, and there's only one thing that makes fat come back out of your fat cells. And that's what you want to do. You want to use the fat in your fat cells as your energy source. And that's the key to everything. That's the key to losing weight, reversing type 2 diabetes, reversing high blood pressure, everything is eat the fat out of your fat cells. Use that for your energy source. The answer to high quality health, the answer in one sentence to losing weight, reversing type 2 diabetes, getting healthy overall, there's one thing. It's keep your insulin levels low. Insulin is a hormone in your body that is secreted when you have glucose in the blood. When your insulin levels are high, it forces your body to store fat. Physiologically, you cannot burn fat when your insulin levels are too high. The exact opposite same. When your insulin levels are low, then you have to burn the fat out of your fat cells for your energy source. You cannot store it. Physiologically, when your insulin levels are low, you cannot store fat. So that's why I say the key to losing fat is keep your insulin levels low. Okay. That's the key. What makes your insulin levels go high is glucose in the blood. So when your blood glucose goes high, then that causes your body to secrete insulin. When your insulin levels go high, that forces your body, your liver, to turn all glucose into triglycerides. That's a form of fat that is carried around your blood and stored in your fat cells for storage. So when your insulin levels are high, it forces your liver to turn all the glucose into triglycerides, and then it forces your body to store those triglycerides in your fat cells. And that's how you become more and more fat. Okay. So high insulin means you store fat. Low insulin means you remove the fat. You burn the fat out of your fat cells. And that's how you lose weight. And that's how you get healthy. And that's what insulin resistance is. Okay. Insulin resistance is when you have fat cells that are so full of fat, triglycerides, they cannot hold anymore. They call that cell an insulin resistant cell. There's nothing wrong with the cell. There's nothing wrong with your insulin. You're producing plenty of insulin, nothing wrong with your pancreas. It's your fat cell is too full. So as your insulin starts turning all these glucose into triglycerides and stuffing that in your fat cells, once that fat cell is full, it sends it on down to the next fat cell for you start filling that up. That's what insulin resistance is. So since you have fat cells all over the body, you're constantly storing fat in these fat cells until they become very full. Once they're full, that's called insulin resistance. But since we have fat cells all over our body, this takes 10, 20, 30, 40 years before you become totally insulin resistant. So you're working on insulin resistance one cell at a time as you fill it full of fat. That is what prediabetes is. Prediabetes is when you have high insulin levels because you're eating glucose all the time. You have high insulin levels, you're constantly storing fat in your fat cells until each one of your cells becomes totally full. That's prediabetes when you have high insulin levels, but it still is managing your glucose for a little while because you still have more fat cells to fill up. So when you have high insulin levels and normal glucose levels, that is prediabetes. If you have low glucose levels and low insulin, that's when you're healthy. When you have high insulin and high blood glucose, that means that your insulin's been high for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. It's finally made its way all around to all your fat cells, and now they're all full, and now they can't do anything else with the glucose. So now your glucose levels start going high. That's when the medical community is telling you're pre-diabetic, as once your glucose starts coming high. That is not true. That was a marketing ploy to get people on more diabetic drugs because diabetic medications makes diabetes worse because diabetic medications focus on your blood glucose, and a high blood glucose is just a symptom of diabetes. True diabetes, the underlying cause, the root cause of diabetes is insulin resistance, which I just said, that means all your fat cells are so full because of all the glucose that you're eating that's getting turned into triglycerides. I just want you to realize that the way you store fat is what is due to what you put in your mouth. The reason insulin levels go up is because your blood glucose goes up. And it's very key to realize that everybody, the medical community, is having you think that diabetes is glucose problem. So they have you focus on your glucose. We got to get the glucose down, got to get the glucose down. But the way they do it is they produce medications that either make your pancreas produce more insulin, and that gets glucose down, or they have medication that makes your cells more sensitive to the insulin, which means now you're able to store more fat, more triglycerides in your fat cells than you normally would have. So it just kicks the can down the road. It just makes the diabetes, it's going to make it worse, and it's going to make it where it's chronic. So how do you know if you're on your way to having type 2 diabetes? One way you can check is look at your, when you get your cholesterol panel, look at your triglycerides and look at your HDLs. Do not look at your LDLs. That is LDLs aren't even a problem. That's not the thing. You can have very high LDLs or very low LDLs. It makes no difference. But if your triglycerides are high and your HDLs are low, now that's what causes cardiovascular disease. So when you get your blood cholesterol panel, you need to look at your triglycerides and your HDLs. If your triglycerides are more than twice your HDLs, you are starting to cause organ damage, you're starting blood vessel damage, you're starting in prediabetes, and you are getting ready to have organ damage with all your body. So triglycerides divided by HDLs, you want that less than 2. The other thing you could do is just measure your abdomen right around the fattest part of your abdomen, which is the level of your belly button. If you measure that around from the level of your belly button all the way around your back, that circumference of your body should be less than half your height. If the circumference around your body at the level of your belly button is more than half your height, this is indicative that you are storing fat around your organs and you have diabetes and you're going to be getting worse and worse. And you've got to make changes immediately. There's only 2 reasons why your blood glucose goes up. And remember, when your blood glucose goes up, that causes your insulin levels go up. When your insulin levels go up, you turn all that glucose into triglycerides. And then since your insulin levels are up, it forces you to store those triglycerides, the fat, in your fat cells. So the key of everything is keep your blood glucose down. So what makes blood glucose go up in the first place? Stress does that, because stress is how you're supposed to get into your stored glucose. That's the only time you should be really getting into stored glucose, is when you're stressed. You need that fight or flight energy. So bam, when you get that fight or flight, that cortisol stimulation, the cortisol causes your liver to break down its glucose stores called glycogen and put the glucose into your blood. But what's supposed to happen is when that stress is over, now the stress is over, so your glucose comes back down, your insulin levels come back down, and then you start eating fat out of your fat cells again for your energy. That's the way it's supposed to be. The only other way that you get a high blood glucose is because you eat it. So do not focus on how to get a high blood glucose down. Focus on not putting glucose in your blood in the first place. So if you are not eating glucose, your blood glucose will not go high. When your blood glucose does not go high, it'll keep your insulin levels low. When you keep your insulin levels low, it forces you to eat the fat out of your fat cells for your energy source. So the whole key to fat loss is keep your insulin levels low. The whole key to keeping your insulin levels low is quit eating glucose, is the basic building block of all plant-based foods. Anything that does not come from an animal that you're putting in your mouth, anything that does not come from an animal contains glucose. Now, some things have more glucose than others. So if you're looking at God-made food, and your God-made carbohydrates, because the basic building block of proteins is amino acids, the basic block of fat is fatty acids, and the basic building block of carbohydrates is glucose. And the reason I say that is because that's what your body sees. When you eat a meal, our stomach and our intestines are digesting that food. It's breaking all the stuff that you put in your mouth down to those 3 things, either amino acids or fatty acids or glucose. And then you also get vitamins and minerals out of that. But that's what your bloodstream sees, is fatty acids, amino acids, and glucose, and then the vitamins and minerals. That's all it sees. It doesn't know calories. Your body doesn't know calories. It doesn't know anything like that. It just needs what nutrients does it need. So if you can keep your stress levels down and you are not eating carbohydrates, then you're going to be healthy. Now, like I said, all plant-based foods have carbohydrates, are made out of carbohydrates. Now, think of it, the food that grows above the ground, that's going to have less carbohydrates than, say, the plants that grow below the ground, like a potato, sweet potato, baked potato, or rust potato. Think of how solid those are. They're full of starch, and all starches is long chains of glucose. So there's lots of glucose in the vegetables that are below the ground. Now, think of that compared to iceberg lettuce or something. So the things that grow above the ground, there's not going to be very much glucose in there, but there's going to be some. So if you're obese, if you're diabetic, I would highly recommend avoiding all the plants that grow below the ground. And if you want to avoid the ones that grow up above the ground, that's perfectly fine. You can live your entire life and never put a plant based food in your mouth. And again, to determine whether something is plant based or not, just look at it and say, did this come from an animal? If the answer was no, then it was plant based. So, animal things are like eggs, cheese, cottage cheese, meat, fish, pork, cream cheese, Greek yogurt, milk, anything that comes from an animal. Eggs are great. If it comes from an animal, you're good. If it comes from a plant, you got to be careful. Then the third type of food, so we have animal based foods, plant based foods, and the worst is chemical based foods. Man made food is chemical based foods. These are all chemicals. These are made in chemical plants. Tons of chemicals are used on it. And all these chemicals are foreign to our body and cause the inflammation in our body for all kinds of reasons. So, without a doubt, when you shop, you do not want to shop down the center aisles of the grocery store. You want to shop all the way around the periphery of the grocery store. And that's where your real meat is, your real fruits, your real vegetables, your full fat dairy with full fat milk, cottage cheese, yogurt, everything we just said. Okay. So the key to losing fat is, and to reversing diabetes, is not to look at glucose. It's to look at the source, not to look at calories, but look at the source of those calories. And if your source of calories is glucose, which means you mainly eat plant-based foods or man-made food, which is horrible, then that's why you are on your way to type 2 diabetes. Okay. So, first thing, when you think about why we eat, there's only one reason why we eat. There's one reason why God made us have a hunger signal. That's because our body needs nutrients. And the only way it's going, because it burns through the nutrients that it has. So, what nutrients is our body made out of? Our bodies are made out of protein, it's made out of fat, made out of cholesterol, vitamins, minerals, and water. Protein, fat, vitamins, minerals, and water, and cholesterol. So that's what we need to be eating all the time. It is not made out of carbohydrates. It is not made out of glucose. We don't have that. We have tiny amounts of stores of glucose. Just to put in perspective how tiny these glucose stores are, to let you know that this is not about using glucose for energy. If you take all the stored glucose in our bodies, every bit of it, the 10% in our liver and the 1% in each skeletal muscle, take all our stored glucose, it only comes about 2,400 calories. That's 2,400 calories with all our glucose stores. If you take 1 pound of fat, 1 pound of fat has 4,000 calories. So 1 pound of fat has almost twice the amount of calories of all the glucose stores in your body. So if you have, say you're 10 pounds overweight, that's 10 times 4. That's 40,000 extra calories that you have on board that you're never going to be able to touch, because you have to keep your insulin levels low to be able to touch it. And people are so used to eating carbohydrates and man-made food all the time, plant-based food and man-made food all the time, that all we do is put more and more glucose in our bodies, which means more and more glucose getting turned into triglycerides, which is a form of fat, and then more and more triglycerides being stored in our fat cells. So the key is quit eating man-made food totally. Everybody should quit eating man-made food. Everything in a box, bottle, bag, can, things that in the middle aisle of the grocery stores with a label, a huge label with nothing but all the chemical toxins that they put in there that our body doesn't know what to do with. The key is stay away from that. Okay. There are two things. There are two things that we've been told that are the most horrible lies that are killing all of us. And that's why we can look at anybody who was born, that lived in the before the 70s and 80s, and how we were so much thinner and so much more healthy back then than all those who were born after the 80s, because now we've been told these two lies. The lies that we've been told is that eating fat makes you fat. That has been a lie forever. We've always known that is not true. It's been proven over and over again. Eating fat does not make you fat. It can't, because high insulin levels is what caused you to be fat. And fat does not increase insulin levels at all. Protein increases your insulin levels just a tiny bit. And carbohydrates, because of glucose, that raises your insulin levels very high. So eating fat is not what makes you fat. Eating plant-based foods with carbohydrates that put glucose in your blood that raise your insulin levels, That's what makes you fat. The other thing that we've been lied to from the food companies, drug companies, everybody, is that glucose is our preferred energy source. So that lets you know fat is supposed to be our energy source because 2,400 calories of stored glucose, that's enough energy to get you by if you sleep for 24 hours. Just your basic metabolic rate. So if glucose was our only energy source, we would be burning out that glucose. We wouldn't be able to say we were out there and there's no food to eat. And that's why it's so different now. We have food everywhere to eat now, but that's not how it was when God first made us. So we needed energy stores on board so we could continue to live and fight and try to find food. That's why we're supposed to use our fat for an energy source, and glucose is only for our fight or flight. So the fact of saying that eating fat makes us fat is a lie. The fact of saying glucose is our preferred energy source is a lie, and it only makes sense. Obviously, fat is our preferred energy source, and this has been studied. This has been proven. Just study after study have shown fat is a much cleaner, much better energy source, and we have plenty on it. Right now, we actually have more than we need. So now that we know that it's insulin that makes us fat, okay, what do? Now we want to do this is we're going to start a new program and we're going to get this fat off of us. We're going to get rid of all the diabetic medications and blood pressure medications. We're going to get rid of all of that. Okay, now we know the way to do that is keep our insulin levels low. So how do we do that? A lot of people say, I'm going to start this Monday. Monday, I'm going to start this huge goal. And then Monday comes and it leaves and you don't do it. Okay. It's not because you're lazy. It's because you're overwhelmed. There is so much noise out there about how you should be able to lose the fat. Take this drug, go work out, start an exercise program, buy gym clothes, do all this. It's all a lie. It's people trying to make money off of you. We're just saying use the food you already have available to you, but stick more to the animal-based foods. If you stick to the carbohydrates of plant-based foods, just be careful. Some have more glucose than others. Okay. What you want to do is you want to just take one simple thing and do that where you can do it every single day, almost without thought. You don't want any restrictive diets. There's no reason for restrictive diets. You do not need to have long workouts. In fact, if you're not used to working out, you should not be working out. And don't feel guilty. If you can't do something, it's just food. If you can't stick to your program, just realize that you fell off. It's not that big a deal, and just start right back to the next day. Okay. But what you really want to do is make today your real day one. You don't have to wait till something happens because all you're doing is assessing every single bite that you put in your mouth. Okay. So some people, they feel like this is going to be so hard that they lack willpower. And that's why they're not doing this. It's not because you lack willpower. It's because you're starting too big. You don't want to have a bunch of big, hairy goals right off the bat, because if you're not used to it, if you're not in that cycle of making little bitty goals and achieving and making a little bit, getting that momentum going, then you just start with one big goal. It's going to be overwhelming and chances are you're going to stop it. So realize it's not about a perfect plan. Okay. This is food. And we are talking food. We are not talking exercise. It's food. So if you find a moment of weakness and you eat what you know you shouldn't have, don't beat yourself up with it. Just realize it. Maybe think about what caused you to do that. Was it because you weren't prepared? You knew you were going to be hungry, but you didn't prepare food in advance? Or is it because you actually were trying to skip a meal and you just couldn't do it? You're trying to do intermittent fasting, you just couldn't do it. So you eat something. That's fine. That's not a roadblock. It's just a speed bump. Just realize it and start back over again. Okay. So it's not about trying harder. This isn't willpower. You're not trying harder. You're trying to be smarter. Start very small. Just make small changes, something that you can do every single day. Something you brush your teeth every day. You take a shower every day. These are things you just don't even think about. You put your clothes on to go to work every day. You want to do something that you don't even really have to think about it. And it's just setting your mindset to know exactly what you are trying to eat. What you want to do with your food to change your health is you want to change from the inside out. Give your body the nutrients that your body needs and keep the toxins out that your body doesn't need. That's the whole key to healthiness. Eat nutrients and avoid toxins. And that means eat mainly animal-based foods, a little bit of plant-based foods if you want. Just be careful which ones, and definitely stay away from all the man-made food. And this starts really easy. Think about, you don't have to change all your food all at once. Think about what you eat most of the time and then just make that a healthy food. So say you eat Mexican all the time. Most of the things in Mexican food is perfectly fine. The hamburger, the cheese, the lettuce, the tomatoes, all that stuff that's on a hamburger or on Mexican, that's fine. What's bad is the things that come from plants, that especially ultra processed plants. And that's going to be like bread, anything made out of flour. So bread and pasta. So anytime you can get a meal, get rid of anything that's bread or pasta. So for Mexican, the main thing that's bad on that is the shells. So don't eat the chips before you have your Mexican, and don't eat the shell. What my wife and I do, we get the most meat fajitas, and we just don't eat the shell. We just split the meat and we just eat, and whatever vegetables are in that, and that's what we eat. We don't have the chips before, and we don't have the shell. If I get a hamburger, I'll get a double hamburger with all the everything on it, the mushrooms, the bacon, the cheese, an egg. All that is good. All that comes from an animal, but I will not get the bun. Okay, so get rid of the bun, get rid of the fries, and do that, maybe sub buttered broccoli, something like that. Because if you have a meal of mainly animal based food, that's going to be mainly protein and fat. That does not raise your insulin levels. And remember, the whole thing is insulin levels. So your body knows what to do with those amino acids and what those to do with the fatty acids that are in that meal. Once you add a carbohydrate like a bun or like pizza crust or any kind of pasta, when you put that glucose in your blood, now your insulin levels are high, and now your body does totally different things. It'll take that insulin, and even the fat that you just ate in your meal, it's going to store that fat in your fat cells, as well as all the glucose that's going to be turned into triglycerides. If you kept your glucose out of your mouth, if you didn't eat that bun, your insulin levels are low, and it's going to use that fat for all the other things that your body uses fat for. And that's a lot of things. We use fat and cholesterol for many things in our body. It's extremely healthy. So Mexican, just get rid of the shells. Hamburgers, get rid of the bun and the fries. Lasagna, you can make lasagna. Just get rid of the noodles, because the noodles are only there to separate the layers, and put a layer of deli chicken or something like that, deli turkey. Do that as your layer instead of noodles. And now you're keeping your insulin levels low. And same thing with things like French fries. French fries may not be that big a deal, depending on how much, if you have trouble with glucose or not. The main thing with eating anything out at a restaurant that's fried is because they usually use seed oils, and because they're cheap, because they're all made out of chemicals, purely unnatural and extremely toxic to your body, extremely inflammatory. So that's why you don't want to get fried food out, because they all use these horrible toxic seed oils. Some people are starting to come around and use animal fat like tallow and lard, but you have to really research your restaurants to see if they do. So what do we want you to do? The first thing you do is, the two biggest things that are killing us is sugar and flour. Sugar is a combination of glucose and fructose. Fructose is toxic to our body. That's a poison. And glucose is, like we've been talking about, glucose. We eat so much glucose that we're glucose toxic. And that's what's making our insulin levels go high, which is making us be insulin resistant. So glucose is horrible. Sugar is glucose and fructose. And pasta, flour, anything made out of flour is just powdered glucose. So anything, breads, pastas, pizza crust, any of that stuff that's made out of flour, and obviously donuts, crackers, cookies, all that horrible stuff. Every time you eat that, you're putting glucose in your blood. You're making your insulin rise. You're making the insulin turn that glucose into fat and store that fat. That's how it works, because our body doesn't want a lot of glucose. If you take all the blood out of our body and take the glucose out of the blood, it only comes to 2 teaspoons of sugar. So anything else that you eat that's glucose is going to be turned straight into fat and stored. The only reason you don't see it right away is because we have so many fat cells on board that we're slowly filling up each of these fat cells. And again, that's what makes insulin resistance. So the key is, keep glucose out of your mouth. So definitely the first thing, stop all sugar sweetened beverages, all your soda pops, your fruit juices, your energy drinks, your smoothies. All these are just liquid glucose, and liquid glucose gets into your body very quickly, raises your insulin, and also raises it very high. So the first thing you really need to start, if you truly want to get healthy, is quit eating sugary drinks. Okay. Swap that. Instead of having sugar drinks, try to learn to drink water. We've learned to do all these things, have these things that we didn't like at first. Some people started smoking, never liked smoking at first. Some people like drinking beer, never liked the taste of beer. Some people like to drink bourbon, never liked the taste of bourbon before. You can do the same thing with water. Water is so healthy for you. Just learn to drink. There's regular water, there's carbonated water, there's fruit, there's flavored water. Just be careful because they love to put glucose, they love to put sugar, high fructose corn syrup. They love to put that stuff in these drinks and call them healthy, and they're not. So if you could stick to just drinking water, unsweet coffee, and unsweet tea, that's going to go huge to you being able to keep your insulin levels low and burn fat out of your fat cells. That's why so many people say, man, all I did was stop drinking soda pop and I started losing weight. That's why, because soda pop makes your insulin levels go high, makes you store fat, and vice versa. The other thing is the refined carbs, white breads, pastas. When you eat carbs, you're usually hungry about 2 to 3 hours later. When you eat animal-based food, you're giving your body nutrients that satisfies your hunger, and you can go hours without eating again because you finally gave your body the nutrients it needs. So sticking with mainly animal-based foods, definitely stay away from man-made food. As far as God-made plants, fruits and vegetables, again, just be careful because they do have carbohydrates. They do have toxins. So you have to be careful how much you eat and when you eat these. The one thing, if you just stop eating sugar sweetened beverages and stop eating anything made out of flour and stop eating man-made food, if you can just do those things and swap, figure out what you want to eat instead, by not doing that, you're not going to get all these toxins that man-made foods out of. So that's going to decrease the inflammation. You're also not going to be putting a bunch of glucose in your body that raise your insulin. So that's going to keep your insulin levels low. When you keep your insulin levels low, you burn fat out of your fat cells. So you have a constant form of energy because you have plenty of fat in your fat cells. So use that for your energy and you don't lose energy. You actually start feeling better because now you're burning all this energy out of your fat cells because you're keeping your energy levels low. And that's what you want to do. You want to eat the key things that keep the fat coming out of your fat cells and burn that for energy so your fat goes down. You start losing fat. So once you make that first step with food, okay, stop all your sugar sweetened beverages and stop eating anything made out of flour and then start drinking more water. Once you can do that, you need to stay consistent. You need to do little bitty things that are going to keep you consistent. And one of these things, it's not really about motivation. Motivation is just something that gets you doing something. It's about making small habits, small little routines. Like we said at the beginning, it's like showering, brushing your teeth, just small habits that are very easy. You don't want to be thinking about it. If you're talking about motivation, you're talking about your mind inside your brain sitting here and trying to motivate you, trying to build yourself up. But the fact is, you need to get out of your head because your head can tell you good things and your head can tell you bad things. So you don't want to be thinking about this. You want to be doing very easy things that you do without thinking about it and track them, track what you do. So one thing you can do is maybe steps. We said everybody should be walking. Start tracking your steps every single day. However you can. If you have an Apple Watch or a Garmin or whatever you have, try to track your steps every day. Or if you don't track your steps, track how far you walk. Maybe you walk down the block and back, and then maybe around the block and back. And just do something where you're walking and you track it every single day. We track ours at night, right before bedtime. We look at our steps, and then my wife and I, we track how many steps we get this day. It's just a very easy thing to do. It just makes you more mindful of walking. Instead of parking close to a building, park as far away as you can. The other thing you want to do is track your water intake. Take the water you should be taking in is take half of your ideal body weight, and that's ideal body weight. So if you weigh 100 or 220 pounds, you should weigh 170. Take 170 as your ideal body weight, divide that by 2, and that's the number of ounces that you should be drinking a day. In general, that's going to be somewhere around 90 ounces. So instead of counting all our ounces every day, just get a bottle that's 30 ounces. And just all you have to do is know that you need 3 of those bottles a day. So you're tracking your steps, you're tracking your water. And when you do, that means there's other things that you're not doing instead that was actually making you worse. The other thing you want to do is surround yourself with encouragement. Make sure that there's other people around you that know what you're doing and they're there to help you. They aren't there. A lot of people, if they see you start getting healthy, they're going to start saying all kinds of reasons why that is stupid and you shouldn't be getting healthy. They say it in their own little ways, but the reason they say it is because they're not healthy and they hate that you're getting healthy and they're not. And so it's easier to get you to stop being healthy than it is for them to change the ways. Get around people who are very encouraging. There's all kinds of podcasts, there's all kinds of books, there's all kinds of groups that meet every week. Find something that's going to keep you on track. And remember, if you have a bad day, if you have this where you're drinking your water and you're walking and you're not eating any of this ultra processed food because you plan ahead for it, and then all of a sudden something comes up, you find yourself starving and there's nothing around you and you have to eat something, don't beat yourself up about it. Realize it's a bad thing. Figure out why you got in that situation so you prevent it in the first place, and then just start back on again. Okay. Remember, it's a detour. It's not a dead end. It's a speed bump. Remember that only two things that put glucose in is eating it and stress. So if you're not eating it and you're taking care of your stress, your glucose will naturally stay down. So don't look at things like medications and all these herbal medicines and all these things that focus on how to bring glucose down. Focus on your nutrition of why you don't let the glucose high in the first place. Because if your glucose is high, it's your fault because you're the one eating it. All you have to do is stop eating it and the glucose will come down, the insulin will come down, and you'll burn fat out of your fat cells. So the main thing I want you to know, start small. Don't start with any big thing. Just do tiny little things. Track your steps, track your water. And don't eat sugar sweetened beverages and don't eat anything made out of flour. Swap those things for more nutritious things, more God-made food. So that's the main key. You want to focus on whole, low-carb food. So real animal-based is best, and then plant-based. Anything that we call them single ingredient foods. You don't have a long ingredient list of all these chemicals that they put in it. You don't have labels on fruits, you don't have labels on your vegetables, and you don't have labels on your meat. Okay. So if there's not a long label that has a bunch of chemicals in it, then you're probably going to be fine to have it. Basically, if there's a label on your food at all, you really have to assess it because chances are that's not going to be healthy. That's not always the case. But if you have more than 3 or 4 ingredients, chances are, and if there's ingredients that you don't know, it's chemical. And if it's a chemical, it's something your body doesn't know, and it's going to set up an inflammatory response. So keep that out of your body. I just want you to realize it's not about starting big. It's not about exercising. First, you have to change the way you eat. If anybody needs any help with this, you can always go to our website, drstevehewlett.com. You can follow us on YouTube of Dr. Steve Hewlett. And if you want help, we do have help. You can just jump on a call, a wellness solution chat. It'll be a 15-minute call, and we can explain to you different products because we have different things to help people learn the things that they're putting in their bodies that are harmful to them and why, and the things that they should be putting in their body and why it's so healthy for you. So we have all kinds of different ways of trying to get people healthy. So you can just jump on a wellness solution chat, click in the links below, or you can also get it through our website, drstevehewlett.com. But remember, your health journey does not start Monday. Your health journey starts now. And all you have to do is change your thoughts about what you're eating. So until next time, stay nourished and stay well.